Good afternoon. This is the Diversity and Inclusion Committee meeting for October 20th. Hello, everyone. This meeting is being recorded by the Westborough TV, and we have a full agenda. Let's begin. We can start with approval of minutes, or do you want to add something?
Sure. Yeah, why don't we start with this? So I'll make a motion to accept the minutes as presented from the I forget what date it was, 9/22? September 15, 2022 meeting.
I'll second that.
Thank you. So call the vote.
Yeah. All right. Everybody votes?
Yeah. All in favor?
All in favor?
Okay. Unanimously passed.
Yep. Now we have open forum. Anybody there? Calling once?
No.
Okay, we shall begin with what we have planned for today. The master plan implementation update by Jim Robbins.
Mm-hmm.
Come on up, Jim.
That's me.
Welcome.
Thank you for coming.
Here.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with your group. My understanding is you'd kind of like an update of where the plan is at, and I will do that and talk a little bit about next steps. And if you have any questions about the plan itself, this is a good time to ask.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm Jim Robbins, the town planner. I've been here a long time. This is actually the third master plan update that I've done with the town. And they're generally 10 to 15 years between, so you can do some math and know how long I've been here. The plan was officially adopted at town meeting. I should say it's officially adopted by the planning board in October of last year, and then brought to town meeting in the spring to just update the town and let them know what was done and that the planning board had officially adopted the plan. COVID interrupted the process, as you're all aware. We began the process actually in the fall of 2019. We had our largest public hearing in February of 20. And within like a week and a half, COVID struck, and it stopped us from meeting in person. But we had over a dozen public meetings. Maybe some of you attended them remotely because we had them on Zoom. The committee was made up of 23 members from the public and from town boards and town departments. We came up with 12 major categories that we studied, the usual ones, which are the transportation, housing, land use, zoning, infrastructure, the economic development, cultural environment, the natural environment, but added to that 3 new categories that I know of no other community in the Commonwealth has studied. One of them was diversity and inclusion. Another one was climate change and sustainability. And the third one was public health. And of course, public health was on our mind at the time because we're in the middle of a pandemic. We thought we should include that in the master plan. So the Board of Health was represented on the Master Plan Advisory Committee. And within the committee, like I said, there was 23 members. We broke the committee down into subcommittees based on the topics that I just mentioned. So, as you know, Kara Presley was a member of our Master Plan Committee, and she served on the Diversity and Inclusion Subcommittee. So Kara, I'm sure, can provide you specific discussion on that topic if you wished. Where we are, yes.
So Tim, thanks for that, and I can do the math, and it seems to me that the time that you've been involved in the master planning coincides with the greatest increase in diversity of the population of Westborough. And as I recall, we've gone from something like 5% of people speaking a language other than English at home, and 20 years later we're up to kind of 25%. Right? So,
that high.
Right, so it's a very different population. Can you give us a quick idea of how much the master plan has changed over those same few decades?
So when you say the master plan, we may not be thinking in the same terms. So correct me if there's something you want to hear about a topic that I don't mention. So typically, when we talk about growth of a community, we address infrastructure, the economy, education, land use, things like that. When I first came here, there were 13 residential subdivisions under review, not even approved. In the review process, in the first month that I was here, I picked up these projects that the former planner was involved with and I was going to see through. 13 residential subdivision approved within a year. That's huge. I haven't had a residential subdivision now in about 3 years. And I'm getting one now that's 3 lots. 3 lots. When I first came, we had 3 or 4 subdivisions that were over 100 lots each. So residential growth has slowed down dramatically, and commercial growth has increased. But that's also kind of misleading because, as you know, cities and towns don't stop growing, they redevelop. They may not develop land new for the first time, but they may raise a structure, change a use, and redevelop that. Like the city of Boston doesn't stop growing. It just redevelops. We're in the redevelopment stage. So as you look at buildings, a good example, Astra Pharmaceutical on Otis Street has been raised. The whole campus, as you know, is now Amazon Robotics. Technology change. It went from a pharmaceutical company to an R&D company doing research and technology as opposed to pharmaceutical drugs. That is pretty indicative of the type of development we're seeing. Reuse of buildings along Route 9, changeover of owners, some commercial buildings actually being converted to residential structures, a lot of rental properties as opposed to ownership properties because there's a dearth in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for rental opportunities. So the market responds to the need. And as any good businessman will change his product to respond to demand, really you're seeing the development of the town respond to the change and desire for housing. And I think rental is appropriate now when we have a large change in the population dynamics within the community. Like you said, 25% of the population now are non-English speakers. Generally, rental housing is what we call the introduction level of home occupation. And so it makes sense that we would have more rental housing. And so I think we are changing to meet the demands. And if you were to look at the master plan, there's a whole discussion of this. There's a discussion about diversity and then a corresponding discussion within the housing chapter to respond to that demand, to plan for how we're going to provide the units. And the downtown is actually where we want to provide them. We want a denser downtown, a downtown where people can walk to the services, walk here to town hall, walk to the library, walk to the grocery store, walk to eat out. All those things, we want to create a more pedestrian-friendly downtown, a more vibrant, thriving downtown.
No, thanks. They're great insights because we tend to think of these things as being linear, but obviously they're not.
They're not.
And clearly they're driven by the economic drivers rather than by people's just wanting something different, right? It's not accidental that these changes happen.
Another good example is the cinema, right? We had a thriving cinema for 15, 20 years, and then the owners decided they weren't interested in the property anymore and literally vacated the property. And then COVID hit, and now people aren't building cinemas like they used to anymore because people want to go back to the theaters. And so there's probably going to be a change in use there. It may not be. It may end up being a cinema again, but it's a good example of how uses can change. Traditional uses can change.
Thank you.
So where was I? Somewhere in the master plan. Yes. So we completed the master plan last fall, and now we're in the implementation phase. And the planning board decided that we really needed to have a consultant that did the master plan back to guide the implementation process. And for the implementation process, we're going to do this differently. Instead of having membership from boards and town department heads and the residents at large, because out of the 23 members of the advisory committee, only 5 of them were residents at large. All of the other members had some existing involvement in government, like all the way from the town manager to a member of the select board, a member of the planning board, to department heads like the superintendent of schools, myself, people like that. In this phase, there'll be none of that, except for the town manager, 1 member of the board of selectmen, and 1 member of the planning board, and 11 members at large. So that's very different. And we had our consultant, which Verizon Hagen Bruslin, VHB, come in and discuss with us what the difference is between creating the plan and implementing the plan. So the plan had many major goals, and we prioritized the goals from high level to medium level to long range. The consultant is going to help the new implementation committee understand how to negotiate the goals. And what I mean by that is, if you were a member, say, of the Sustainable Westborough Committee, and another member was concerned about the schools, let's say, and another member is concerned about economic development, you might think those are very different issues. But they all interrelate and cross-section with each other. And so there has to be negotiation of what are the first steps we're going to take. So the consultant is going to help us negotiate the priorities. And, excuse me, turn that off. It's humorous, but it isn't in a meeting. The consultant is going to lead the committee through the process. No new goals will be created. There'll be no changes in the direction of the plan, only the stage that the plan is in. So the implementation committee has been appointed. We put in an application for residents to respond, and we got 24 or so applicants, from which we chose 11. And we're waiting for all of them to finish to be sworn in, and I expect our first meeting will be next month. So that's where we are currently. Questions, please.
So can you talk a little bit about that prioritization process for the goals, and kind of where is the planning
sorry.
committee bringing
sorry.
that's
I'm
fine.
going to turn this off completely.
Sure.
It's the best way to do it. Okay, I'm sorry.
Sure. No. And is the planning committee bringing those forward to the implementation committee, or are they going to start off sort of relooking at those?
So we're going to start with a document.
Yeah.
And anyone that is on the implementation committee that wasn't part of the master plan process will have a time to get up to speed.
Mm-hmm.
And the consultant will walk the entire committee through the plan and explain how the goals were prioritized. Because the last thing that the master plan committee did was they arrayed all the goals and they prioritized them within each area of concentration. So if there were 12 chapters in the plan, each chapter had short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals, and each of those was prioritized. So the committee is not going to reprioritize the goals. The committee is going to negotiate the order in which they'll be implemented. So they won't take something that was long range and bring it up to top priority. It will remain long range. They won't take something that was an immediate priority and put it on the back burner. They will start with the top priorities, and they'll decide between them where we're going first. Some of them will be economic goals and won't be able to be implemented right away. Others of them will be regulatory goals. We'll change our zoning. We'll start a new program that don't cost money and need to go to town meeting. The zoning doesn't need to go to town meeting, but that are things we can accomplish in the short term. And so a good example of this is, I spoke earlier that we wanted to have more housing in the downtown. Well, housing requires infrastructure, water, sewer, electric, et cetera, to support the demands of a new building, particularly a housing development. Well, right now we have a sewer moratorium on multifamily connections because our wastewater treatment plant is reaching capacity. So we need to find other ways to provide wastewater capacity for the town. And it could be that we improve the existing sewer treatment plant. It could be we build a new facility. It could be we recharge the wastewater to the ground. There are other options. But what we're doing right now is we're in what we call a comprehensive wastewater management study, which was begun 5 or 6 months ago, I believe. And when that's concluded, we'll be able to solve this question of how we're going to provide wastewater and move forward with development goals. Now, interestingly enough, the way that the treatment plant works is it's divided into residential development, there's an apportionment for residential development, and an apportionment for commercial and industrial. And we're not in a bind on commercial and industrial. So our business sector can continue to grow, which is a good thing because that's what supports the residential development services. So we're not completely hamstrung, but we are hamstrung on housing. And I'm sure this committee's interested in that.
And is the infrastructure limitation at this level, or is it at the treatment plant level that we have?
It's at the treatment plant.
Right.
They
And we
can't take
share
any
the
more
treatment
flow.
plant, as I understand it, with Shrewsbury, is that correct?
Correct. And as a matter of fact, even though we're the host community, we have less than 50% of the flow,
Right.
whereas Shrewsbury has more than 50% of the flow, and the town of Hopkinton has approximately 10%.
Okay.
So we have 40-some%. And Shrewsbury has like 51%, and Hopkinton has a little less than 10%.
And there's no chance to change that ratio?
We're actually going to talk about that. That's one of the options in the management study.
Okay.
But I can't tell you what the possibilities are until that study's complete. And the Department of Public Works is overseeing that study.
Of course. Okay. Ducking back a little bit, the implementation committee that you talked to that were going to be appointed and finalised and sworn in, how are those people chosen to contribute to this activity?
Sure, great question. So we asked 3 questions. We asked, why do you want to be on the implementation committee? You might be excited and you love the town, you want to serve the town. And what are the qualifications that you bring to the committee? And what would be your area of interest? Because we encourage them all to go online, look at the master plan, and decide, well, maybe I'm interested in housing, or maybe I'm interested in climate change and sustainability. So we got some really thoughtful letters.
Okay. That's good. I attended my first town meeting this week, and I noticed that there were people at that meeting who used that opportunity to push an agenda that was outside the point of discussion at every occasion. And is there a way that you can, or that we can, make sure that the people who are on committees like that are objective and involved for the right reasons?
There'll be a chairman of the committee, and he'll keep the discussion focused.
Okay.
And that happens at every town meeting.
I have no doubt. I've had those same conversations on the streets of the town as well. That's good. So, what are the major challenges? What are the biggest things that are difficult in the execution of our town plan at the moment? What are the biggest hurdles that we have to get over?
So wastewater is definitely one of the largest hurdles.
Right.
Climate change and making sure that this community is prepared to meet the standards of the Governor's Act to make the state of Massachusetts net zero for carbon footprint by the year 2045. We've got a long way to go, not just in years, but in our ability to get up to that point.
Right.
So we're trying, particularly about this point, we're trying to develop a plan where we can ease commercial builders and those who have current commercial properties into compliance with net zero energy demand in their properties. We're also trying to help residents understand how they can purchase economical, net zero energy friendly heating, HVAC, things like that for their home.
Right. One of my personal interests, I'm very aware of the fact that there is an increasing diversity in the origins of people in Westborough, but largely it's fairly homogenous economically, right? It's a very prosperous and comfortable middle-class town, but within that town there is a large population of people who are not so economically strong. People that are working 2 jobs, people that are renting apartments that are costing them a huge proportion of their actual income. And I was wondering if those sorts of issues were being taken into account in the town master plan.
So they are definitely discussed from the very first chapter to the end. That's something that we rely on data. We look at census data to the very point that you just raised. And we know what the percentages are of the new populations, the new cultural communities in town. And we're aware what the age cohorts are too. We know that, for example, young people that graduate from high school, go off to college, they may return home for 6 months to 2 years, but they don't stay here. We know that. We're suffering from I hate to use the term, a brain drain.
Yeah.
And because we don't have the services that interest them. We don't have the cultural resources that interest them. And they're priced out of the housing market.
Yeah.
So those are three big strikes against them. We're aware of that. So we want to address those issues. One of the ways we want to address those issues is to provide more cultural activities for that age group so that they'll be attracted to stay here. You know yourself, I know when I was a young professional, just got out of college, I went to Boston without a job. I said, I'm going to work in this city because I want to live in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was outpriced. I slept on my friend's couch for a couple months until I got a good job and was able to afford a entry-level apartment. We've got to make it possible for Westborough to be an attractive community for young people who want to do the same thing. I want to stay in Westborough. So what are the three things we got to address? Like I said, it has to be culturally attractive. It has to be economically possible. And there has to be a critical mass of those kind of people with a job for them. There have to be entry-level jobs. Because if they can't afford to live here, they're not going to stay here.
Yeah. And to sort of elaborate on that point, the fact that we have the strong reputation of a great place for people to bring up a family, we've got good schools, etc.
Yeah.
But then we've also got the other end of that where people are leaving Westborough after their children have graduated from the school system. Right?
Yeah.
And I know that's being addressed in other ways, but is that something that's also a priority to the planning committee?
Yeah, we would identify ourselves in the plan as a bedroom community. People live here so their children can go to our great schools. They work somewhere else. They might work in Worcester or Boston, Framingham, or Providence even. And after their children graduate from high school, they might stay while the children are in college, or they might just plain leave. Once the children choose not to live in Westborough anymore, they're gone. And so the house turns over, which is a good thing, but it also creates instability. And if you want stability, we go back to the same things that I talked about earlier. You've got to provide for the next generation. But we do have a lot of older residents, and you hear loud and clear about the needs of the over 65 community and what their needs are to pay everything from taxes to living expenses. And that's a big chapter in our master plan.
And that's part of the issue that I'm wrestling with too, the fact that we have less economically advantaged people that are working really hard and have no time to look at things and try and change and be involved in the community, whereas we have older residents who are professionally educated, relatively wealthy, and have way too much time on their hands and are able to be active within the community. So that's a sort of a balance there. The people that really don't have the need, the people that really have the need, and the amount of information and time they have to act on the information is very different.
Which is why we wanted an implementation committee that was made up of
Yeah.
new people.
Right.
You know, we're hoping that these new people will go back to their neighborhood, talk to their neighbors, talk to their friends, talk to their family about the issues facing the community, to bring more people in so that they are active. We're trying to tap the resources that haven't been tapped.
Excellent.
So can you tell us a little bit about the timeline? So you said the meeting is expected, first meeting of the new implementation committee is expected for next month. And then can you give us a preview of the timeline?
Sure. So the first couple of meetings will be getting the committee up to speed, helping to understand the process, understanding their role or their charge in that process. And then probably by the second meeting and into the third meeting, tackling the actual understanding of the plan and what was intended. And then probably another 5 or 6 meetings to start sorting out or negotiating the direction and the goals of the plan. And then after about the 5th or 6th meeting, I think we will shed our consultant, to use a term that they use, because their contract is only for 6 meetings. So they intend to help the committee in a steep learning curve. And then the committee itself should last about 2 years.
Okay.
And then turn the plan over to the planning board, who will then be charged with implementing the plan on their own, because no one's going to want to be on a committee for 10 years. Even the planning board elected members are on for 5 years. And I guarantee you at the end of 5 years, most of them have had enough. Because these are going to be evening meetings. because most of these people will work a daytime job, and they're going to volunteer their time in the evening.
Mhm.
And it will, for the first few months, be intense. And then once they understand the process, it'll be a little less intense. But the town departments, like myself and Kim here, as well as other members of departments like Department of Public Works, Board of Health, the Building Department, they will all be called in to actually implement the goals that are identified by this implementation committee. So I expect the first 2 years, there'll be a lot of new ideas brought to town meeting, whether it's a program, a zoning change, some new kind of land use, something to do with sustainability, maybe a local bylaw. These are things that were recommended in the master plan. The first 2 years is generally where you see the most action. So for example, the last master plan recommended a design review board, which we have. We implemented almost immediately. It recommended reuse of the Bay State abrasive site, which is now Bay State Commons. It recommended building housing near the train station. You know there is. There's a lot of new housing near the train station. And all of those things were accomplished in the first 2 years after the master plan was adopted. And I consider those to be significant. Changes to the downtown, changes to the residential district, and an administrative bylaw, which is design review. And there have been other administrative bylaws, and there have been other land use and zoning tools created, like a senior living overlay district to address seniors, 55 and older housing, things like that.
Mhm.
Those were all in the master plan.
Mhm.
You mentioned the sorts of interactions you've had with this committee in the past. Largely, we've got a lot of new faces here. What can we do to help what you're doing?
I would say watch the meetings. They'll be televised. And I would say please offer your input. If you see something that's missing, something that you think's inaccurate or misunderstood, or if you want to offer your help or your ideas. I've worked through Kara. She was a member of the original committee, and she'll still have a voice in the implementation because she's department head.
Jim, just one of the things the committee has talked about doing is developing a set of questions to help department heads think through diversity, equity, and inclusion implications as they consider new programs, services, things
That's
like
great.
that. And maybe you could just speak a little bit to some of the conversation we had at our department head meeting about how that's really probably an opportunity for department heads to be thinking about these questions and weighing in. So would you just talk a little bit about our discussion and how department heads will provide
Yeah, I'm going to have to
feedback?
recall that, so help me out if I missed something. One of the things that comes to mind right away is we talked earlier about English as a second language and how many cultures don't have English as their primary language. In conjunction with the Central Mass Regional Planning Agency in Worcester, we're in Worcester County, they put together a pamphlet about diversity, education, and growing in a community for the first time. And it was printed in English, Spanish, Portuguese, and Chinese. And I brought those back and gave them to Kara, asking her to distribute them to those that spoke those languages so that they could fill out this survey to give input to the community. So that's one way that we're trying to involve those people who might feel intimidated when they're in a room with everybody who doesn't speak their language. Everyone speaks another language that they don't feel articulate in, or they don't feel fully equipped to explain their ideas. Department heads, wow, I'm trying to think, other than that particular item. Oh, okay, so wayfinding is, I thought I saw that come in behind me. One of the things that the Economic Development Committee has been talking about is creating a wayfinding program for the community, particularly for the downtown. And one of the things that could be introduced in that is to have non-English on the wayfinding tools. So wayfinding generally means I can go to some source, could be a physical source on the street like a sign, and look for directions. But if English is not my language, I may not understand those directions, or I may get confused. And so one thing that could happen is the wayfinding tool could have alternate languages. You may see that in Boston. I can even tell you where they are in Boston and what street corners. Maybe Zach might be able to too. And I know that they have them in Cambridge. They have them in downtown near Faneuil Hall in Boston, and in the Seaport District, where you can walk up to a kiosk and type, see restaurant, hit restaurant, choose your language, and it tells you where the restaurants are located. Might even have a menu.
I have something similar.
Yeah. You're right, smartphone, but not everybody uses that.
Yeah. And is the thought that we would have something similar here? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not on the same scale,
Mm.
but in a way that could be usable locally, yes.
Mm.
Zach may even talk about that sometime.
Don't
He
steal his
is. He's
thunder.
going to talk.
But
What
we
did
had
I miss,
talked
Kim?
about as the implementation committee discusses specific projects, that town staff, the town manager will sit on the implementation committee and be sharing information with department heads so that there is some feedback in terms of, just capacity to move some of these projects forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as part of that capacity discussion, it's also potentially some of these DEI lens questions that we might want to begin introducing. So.
Yeah, capacity is a good topic, so I'm going to elaborate on that. Thank you, that was a good segue. I got an email, which I'm going to share with you, from a resident 4 or 5 days ago, and I'm not going to identify who it was. I've never worked with this person, don't know who the person is, and said they had read the master plan, was interested in the implementation committee, but couldn't find the time to be on the committee. But please do something. You have done nothing in the last 20 years. And I just listed a whole bunch of things that we did. But what happens often is people aren't engaged, and they don't reach out to people in town government to find out what's going on. And in today's world of technology overload, I would think that would be really easy to do. And you showed me your smartphone a minute ago, right? There's no reason why they can't attend a meeting. All the agendas are posted online. They could watch it on TV at the very least, or they can come in person and participate or ask questions. The capacity issue for departments, when we start implementing a goal, could be the wastewater treatment issue that we've talked about. That may have additional stress, additional demands on town department staff. It may have stress on our budget. It may require capital expenditures. So the departments will be appearing at town meetings, and prior to that, at meetings with the Board of Selectmen, at meetings with the Finance Committee, at meetings with the Capital Facilities Committee, and talking about the goals of the master plan and how they affect town government and ultimately town services. So I would stay clued in to the Finance Committee meetings and the Capital Expenditures Committee.
It seems to me that there are, these the very big goals, the vision, right? And there are so many steps to get there.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, where people there's that disconnect of saying, for someone to say, what have you done in the last 20 years? But you, in your presentation, you've just listed, 10 different things that have been a result of previous master plan, planning process. So I think that that's the piece that we we lose touch with, is all of the sort of smaller steps that lead to bigger change.
Right.
And then it feels, I think, sometimes for residents, like, this is a change that I'm not sure where it's coming from. So it's kind of retracing the steps back to the vision. The end result is an implementation over many years and many people's efforts over time. And it's also something that change can be both positive. There are pros and cons to it, right? So I think that that's part of, as we go forward, maybe something that we can also try to make those connections back to the vision and then the steps that lead to it. And the steps may have cost associated with it or have effort associated with it within the town that leads us to say we can't do something else because we're doing this, which is towards the ultimate, the goal.
Making choices, right?
Yeah,
That's what
it's that there's trade-offs. So, and I think part of our goal in kind of putting together what we're, this list of questions is, as those trade-offs are happening, as those decisions are happening, are we, as a town, as a community, looking through that lens of diversity and inclusion and equity to say, are those choices being made thinking about the impacts of those trade-offs to all of our community members. So I think that that's a place where we can hopefully help and kind of keep our ear on and our eyes on things, as watching the meetings and things like that. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, and you actually saw that play out at the town meeting this past week. The presentation for the library.
Mm-hmm.
That was referenced in the previous master plan, and it is referenced in this new master plan. The fact that the library needs to be updated. It doesn't recommend that we have a new library, but it recommends updating library. So that is a way to do it, is to give the town a new library, which I think was appropriate. But people make choices whether or not they're willing to pay for that. And of course, the obvious question is, well, if we appropriate this $25 million as the local share for building this library, what will that mean to my tax bill? Everybody always asks that. So that number was presented.
Right.
And that I think helped inform people whether or not they were willing to pay that for a new library.
Mm-hmm.
And so that speaks to your point about making choices.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that the Master Plan Implementation Committee is going to have to do on a much smaller scale. They will negotiate.
Mm-hmm.
Can we afford this right now? It may be our top goal, but we can't afford it. So maybe we ought to advance this other goal until we can afford the first goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think.
Anybody else have any questions?
When I invited Jim in, I advised him that he might be invited back just for some periodic updates.
That's fine.
Yeah, that would be
lovely
wonderful.
hearing the
Thank you.
plan and the process, and
Yeah,
yes,
thank
we
you.
definitely need.
Please follow us and tune into the planning board too.
Great.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm just going to see, this is Zach Bowner, he is here. I'm just going to see if I can help him get his presentation set up.
Great.
Oh, you don't? Good, because I don't
He's
entirely
in.
know. I don't know how to do that.
All right, Zach, step, come on.
Thanks,
Welcome.
Jim.
Thank you.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. By habit, I was plugging in the presentation.
That's okay.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and the rest of the board for inviting me in today. As Kim had alluded to, my name is Zach Bowner. I'm the Economic Development Coordinator for the town. And in that capacity, I serve as the town's primary liaison to businesses. I work on policies and programs and recommendations to promote the town of Westborough as a great place to do business and to help grow our commercial and industrial tax base. The primary thing that I would like to update you about today is that the EDC is very close to kicking off a project around improving our minority and women-owned business outreach and support. So this is actually a project that has quite a bit of history already at this point. We, I want to say December or November of 2020, the town received a technical assistance grant from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to undertake a local rapid recovery planning effort, or LRRP for short. As part of that effort, we were partnered with consultants who were provided us by the state to help us create 10 or so actionable projects for the town to support our business community with a particular emphasis on our downtown area in the post-COVID economy. As we were going through the LRP, which was a sort of three-phase project, the first of which was a relatively extensive outreach, ideation, and workshopping phase, one of the challenges that we felt as planners was, we had challenges identifying, reaching out to, and engaging our minority and really all of our underrepresented business communities in town. I think in Westborough, it's been anecdotally clear to me that there is a very high concentration of underrepresented business owners in town. We recently launched the Shop Westborough business directory, which I would strongly encourage you all to look at on www.shopwestboroughma.com. And as part of that, we asked businesses to identify themselves as minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses. And I don't have the numbers off the top of my head right now, but I was both shocked and impressed by such high concentrations from those communities that we had, participating in the effort, and that we have in Westborough as members of our broader community. I think it was nearly 50% of the businesses, of which there are almost 200 in the directory, identify themselves as women-owned businesses, and a large portion, I believe up to a quarter of the businesses identify themselves as minority-owned. So, as we were going through our LRRP process, it was clear to us that there's a lot of underrepresented businesses out there. I think at this point, it's been pretty well syndicated, at all levels, that my underrepresented businesses face unique challenges compared to, white or male-owned businesses. And I think that it's also been pretty well syndicated at this point that those businesses were impacted differently and greatly by the COVID-19 pandemic, especially when compared to other groups and communities. And so as we were working through our LRP planning process, we knew there was a need, but the challenge that we faced was we didn't really know what. We didn't have much success in engaging these groups. I was still relatively new to town at the time, and so I didn't have the connections in our business community that I do now. And so, what we ultimately decided to do was, because we felt that this was such an important topic, but one that we didn't have the time in that project or the resources to truly explore and understand, that we actually needed to do additional work and hire maybe a more specialized consulting team to help us think through what are the ways in which, as a town and as an EDC, we can better engage underrepresented business communities and bring them into the conversation more. And then secondly, what are some very tactical steps that we can take in order to better serve our underrepresented business communities as well. And so I think Jim has already alluded to some of these things, but it could include anything from, considering putting permit applications in different languages. One of the reasons we didn't address in the LRP is because we couldn't do that outreach. We didn't know what languages, right? Or even if that would be, even if that's the right thing to do, if that's a real challenge or pain point for people. And so, we have recently finalized a service agreement with a technical assistance provider to collaborate with us on this work and to help us do the outreach and understand the baseline conditions in the town, engage underrepresented business owners, and come up with an actionable plan that we can then take of tactical, kind of quick win type stuff to better engage and better support our minority and women-owned businesses. As part of that, and I believe I did come to this committee, feels like a long time ago at this point, to let you know that this is something that we were doing. I know that this committee has discussed a more broad D&I assessment or study for the community. I want to make sure that we're not doing double work and that there are proper guardrails set up for both pieces of work. I also wanted to come and make you guys aware of this effort because we will be asking for someone from this committee to get involved in this piece of work as a stakeholder once we kick off the project and form our, advisory committee for the work. If we are able to get our service agreement signed within the next couple of weeks, we are expecting to begin and kick off the project with our consultants in December of 2022. So this is something that's coming pretty quickly. It's something I'm personally excited for. I think this is a really important piece of work, and that will actually wrap up in June of 2023. So that's the timeline for implementation for the project. Some of the features is that in terms of deliverables, what we expect the consultants to provide us with and help facilitate the creation of is a vision and objectives for how we want to engage and support minority and women-owned businesses, a baseline assessment of the existing conditions in town, a list of tactical recommendations for how we can increase engagement and better support them through the post-pandemic recovery, and then roles and responsibilities for each of the players on Team Westborough for who's going to do what and who's going to own what pieces of that follow-up work. How we'll get there will involve a combination of document collection and document review, data collection, and data review, as well as real interviews with a variety of town staff and community stakeholders, and focus groups with those staff, as well as a survey to capture the broader net of minority and women-owned business owners that we have in town, to understand their unique challenges, their needs, and test some of the ideas that we might get from our core group of stakeholders. That group will involve representation from various town staff and boards and committees. We've had multiple meetings with our, preferred consultant at this time, to test ideas on the scope of services and who might be part of that group. Some of the folks involved, would include somebody from the select board, from the D&I committee, the planning board, town staff such as the chief procurement officer and grant administrator, community development director, and health director, and a handful of other folks as well. And then at the end, we'll kind of take what we know, summarize the learnings from the study, and make tactical recommendations for how we might go forward from there. I think Jim had also alluded to this. I think it can be frustrating that by the end of 2023, what we'll have is another list of recommendations. But I think this is a really complex problem to crack, and one that we're not going to solve. I'm not going to pretend like we're going to solve it in a day. And I think that this work and your engagement in it going forward will be a big next step towards providing better engagement and service to those business communities. Additionally, I'll just say a few things about some of the stuff that EDC has done recently to incorporate D&I into our work. I think now is a great time to do this project because, having done the Shop Westborough directory and actually started to collect information on, whether businesses consider themselves to be minority-owned or women-owned or veteran-owned, we have now a really strong list of contacts to reach out to and to engage, from various different underrepresented communities. The EDC has made multiple changes in the last year to some of its programs and policies.
Zach, sorry to interrupt. Can you just explain EDC?
Oh, my mistake. I'm sorry. The EDC is the Economic Development Committee. It's an acronym. I should introduce the full text of an acronym before doing that, and I apologize. The Economic Development Committee has done multiple things in the last year to better support D&I. One of those things is, as you may know, the Economic Development Committee actually has a grant program that supports businesses in Westborough that are pursuing growth and expansion projects, and also helps recruit new businesses to our community. Previously, the EDC did not have a formal scoring rubric or any formal process for weighing one application over another. Part of that's because soon after the program was launched, my position became vacant for an extended period of time, and there just weren't a lot of applications coming in, so that the need to evaluate one application over another didn't really exist yet. In the past year, we've gotten many more applications than we have in the past, and so it emerged the question of, well, how can we say X business deserves this money more than Y business? And as part of the rubric that we created, we actually, one of the lines to give businesses points over another business is dependent on whether they identify as a minority or a women or a veteran-owned business, or some underrepresented business community. So when we think about how we're using public funds to support economic growth in our community, we are incorporating an eye for diversity and inclusion issues, and we are trying to prioritize in some ways support going to underrepresented business communities that have faced different and difficult economic challenges. Similarly, on the Shop Westborough directory, which is another recent project that we have completed, when we were designing the directory, one of the things that was most important to us was for users to have the ability to search businesses based on underrepresented business community designation. So you can, yes.
So Zach, the business that you're in is basically helping other businesses set up here in Westborough. And I assume that most of your conversations happen with people that are proposing to set up a business or to move a business to Westborough. But that's only going to be successful, I naively think, if the people of Westborough support that business. Because I can't imagine people from the surrounding districts flocking to Westborough to do their small business support, for example, because we don't have a kind of a central shopping street that could be an attraction, for example. Most of our businesses are in malls that are separate from the main part of the town. So two questions, right? So firstly, is there an effort to try and centralise things in the downtown area so that it becomes a walkable, attractive little shopping precinct? And the second part of that is complementary. Is there an effort to actually go to the people of Westborough and make them aware of what the possibilities are for both entertainment and just to support their local businesses?
So certainly, I'll try and tackle them separately. One is that, I think the concept of downtown revitalization is not new in our community. And I think there has been a lot of effort put into it to date, but there's obviously still a lot of work to be done. I think, depending on what we're talking about, I think the departments that are involved can vary. I think and Jim and the planning department are deeply involved in specifically some of the pedestrian safety improvements that have happened in downtown and that, I think people expect and that the master plan recommends continue to happen in downtown. We care about having a very strong, vibrant downtown. That's all over the master plan. That's something that we heard from the community in the LRP process, and that I continue to hear from folks who reach out to my office today. So that's something that's definitely very important to us. We do not necessarily want that to come at the expense of the other commercial corridors in our community either. And so we have to walk that line and balance those needs moving forward. But the LRP, which we're only at the beginning of implementing, we've implemented 2 projects to date and are working to get to projects 3 and 4 of a 10 project plan. The intent of that was to help stimulate some investment and some energy into our downtown area to make it more like the type of space that I think you're envisioning. And so, there are that in addition to the master plan, which also has a significant set of recommendations for the downtown to achieve that vision. Those planning documents are still relatively new, relatively fresh. As you just heard, the master plan implementation committee is just, beginning to tackle the work that's under its belt. And so the short answer to that question and my long-winded response is that yes, I think downtown revitalization is a priority for us, although not at the expense of other parts of the community. And I think the town has invested a lot over the last 2 to 3 years in planning for some of those, in planning to create or affect that vision. And I think that there's a lot of work, a lot of great work has been done. There's still a lot of work ahead of us, and we're sort of just within the last year or 2 starting to get underway and rolling our sleeves up and really implementing some of that. To your second question, which is about how do we get the people who live in Westborough to truly appreciate and understand all the great businesses and nonprofit organizations and assets that we have in Westborough already. I think we're still kind of at the beginning of that process. Shop Westborough and the online business directory is sort of the first step to some of that. I think one of the things that we heard loud and clear in the LRP was that businesses wanted assistance with marketing. They wanted to do cross-marketing, and they wanted it to be digital. And so this project was something that we put together to address some of that feedback that we heard. And it was never intended to be a standalone project. I think, the first step towards making people aware of what is out there and all the exciting businesses that you might be able to, dine, shop, or, visit in town, you need to know what those are first. And so, we built the Shop Westborough directory. We have 200 businesses or so listed in it. I think we've started to prepare marketing materials and, think about how a broader Shop like Westborough campaign, what that might look like, leveraging the Shop Westborough directory as sort of our, I guess, Rosetta Stone, so to speak, as like a reference place for people who live in this town to look at, hey, I want to get a haircut, and I'd like to get my haircut I'd like to support a minority-owned business. I can use this directory to find the businesses out there that that can meet my needs. Additionally, I think it's often, I know that your question, the focus was on residents, but I think it's often underappreciated the number of hotels and hotel rooms that we have in Westborough. I think pre-pandemic especially, we had a lot of business travel traffic in town. Every time somebody stays at the DoubleTree or at the Marriott or at the Hampton Inn, those people are most likely not super familiar with Westborough. They might not know what great a town exists just on the other side of Route 9. We want to engage, our tourism and hospitality sector as well as partners to encourage that major, customer base to shop local and help discover some of the assets that we have.
So that's a good point, and it kind of relates to the residents as well, because if you look at the way our town is set up, we have a core of downtown that is walkable to these business districts. And then we have subdivisions outside, many of which don't even have sidewalks. So I say, you have to drive from somewhere. And I was at the town meeting, and there was a lot of contention around the availability of parking downtown, which I thought was completely misguided, because I have never had difficulty finding a car park that's further than 50 yards from where I want to go. It's just never been an issue. Yet there's this perception, presumably amongst people that need to drive to places, that it might be a problem finding somewhere to park. And maybe that's something that the Economic Development Committee could work on, because it's an issue that's perceived that doesn't exist, in my opinion.
Certainly. And, Jim had mentioned wayfinding. The Economic Development Committee believes that wayfinding is not the whole solution, but a key piece of the solution to that problem. Jim probably mentioned this and I might have missed it, but in 2019, the town collaborated with the Central Massachusetts Regional Planning Commission, CMRPC, to do a study on this parking issue. For years, anecdotally, folks in town have heard that we have a parking problem downtown. So we contracted with the Central CMRPC to help us figure out, okay, do we have a parking problem, and if so, at what times, and how might we address it? Their recommendation back to the town and their findings were that overwhelmingly we don't have a parking problem. We have actually a lot of underutilized parking, and I think the way that they phrased it was that we have really a wayfinding problem, which is that parking exists in Westborough and downtown. It's just that folks don't know where it is, or how to access it, or once they're there, how to find what our downtown has to offer. And so one of the reasons why a wayfinding project is recommended by the LRP, and why we're very excited about that project, is because we think that it can help alleviate some of that sort of false perception that you're alluding to, that there is a parking challenge downtown. But again, that's only one piece of the problem. I think broader attitudes need to change as well. But we really think that will have a good effect on that. Additionally, something that I've been working on, admittedly, for a number of weeks and just haven't got around to finishing yet, is a downtown parking map to give to businesses and to put on the EDC's website, so that folks know where that parking exists, and also so folks know what the restrictions on any of that parking are. As some of you may know, there are a handful of spots downtown that are unrestricted. There are some spots that have a 1-hour parking limit. There are some spots that have a 2-hour parking limit. There are municipal lots. There is off-street parking on side streets. And so, we know that there is a perception that parking is a challenge. And, I do hope to complete that map soon and get that out there so that people can use it as a resource and so that businesses can have it to give to their customers or have in their, have on a bulletin board in their storefront, so that people know where they can park when they want to take advantage of their services. I hope that answers your question.
No, it does, thank you. And I'm relieved to think that it wasn't just my perception. I'm relieved to hear that other people are on top of that misperception.
There's actually, you can look at the study, there's a lot of data to suggest otherwise.
Yeah.
Although, and I think there are peak times, so
Yeah.
on election night, it's hard to park here, but that's going to be the case whenever 700 or 800 or 1,000 people are coming to the same spot in the same hour.
One event that I think I think the EDC was a part of was a winter stroll last winter, which in downtown, which for me, for my family, introduced us to a lot of additional businesses in downtown that we weren't necessarily aware. And then there was shuttles that took people from downtown to some of the other shops that are out on Route 9, or that you would tend to need to drive to, and I think that was a great event, and I'd like to see, we'd love to publicize those too, if you have more of those types of things that are scheduled. That's something that we'd love to do.
Certainly. I really appreciate that offer, and I will be sure to take you up on it.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the feedback about the winter stroll. We will be having that event again this year.
Great.
I believe it will be Sunday, November 27th, from 2 to 5 p.m. I will keep you guys in the loop once we have a final map to distribute and stops that are planned. But we do have an event this Tuesday, November 25th from 4 to 7 p.m. It's called the Main Street Trick or Treat event. We have, at this point, I believe 44 downtown businesses and organizations participating in the event, plus the 4 town offices in the area. And the intent is that, very similar to the Winter Stroll, create a fun event for the community that might expose you to new businesses that you weren't aware of downtown, right in your backyard. And so last year, the event was a pretty big success. It was the first year we did it with businesses. The reviews were overwhelmingly positive, and a bunch of businesses that weren't able to participate last year wanted to participate this year. And so, we're really happy to be expanding that, and we hope that it brings new foot traffic and new faces to some of the awesome businesses that we have downtown.
Great.
So related to both of those things, I've noticed we've got a couple of Council on Aging buses that are used to ferry people around. Maybe we can paint those up in bright colours and use those as a regular people mover around the town, because they're frequently not being used. They're just used for specific missions.
Mm-hmm. I think it's an interesting idea. I'm sure there's a lot there to unpack and study. Specifically, I know that with buses, or at least, and I only know this because of the Winter Stroll, the cost of operating a bus balloons tremendously if you're going to be using it for more than a couple hours, because the cost of having a driver and then all of the insurance coverages associated with all that, it's very high. Right. And so I think it's an interesting idea, but I also would be wary of the costs that might be associated with something like that.
You don't need to think about my ideas whenever I have them. They come too frequently.
Well, if you ever have any more, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm always interested in hearing people's ideas. At the end of the day, this is your community, right? It's really your right and privilege to vision out, what you want it to look like and how you want it to move forward. And so, if you have an idea, I'm always willing to be an ear and hear it out and test it. And, maybe it's not perfect at the beginning, but maybe we can brainstorm it, workshop it, and get it to something that is. So
appreciate it. Thank you.
Anybody else? You've done a great job, and we would love to have you back.
Yeah, it's great to hear.
It really connects with what our vision of the town was.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you so much.
Anytime. And likewise, please let me know, or I'll be reaching out about getting somebody from this committee involved in the minority and women-owned business study, probably sometime in November. So stay tuned, and I look forward to working with you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zach.
Great.
You want to tackle the questions for the diversity lens, or did we sort of cover most of them?
I think I do want to. I think we should have a little bit more of a discussion of, like, really getting that detailed. I think, we had Jim and Zach here today, but as we are inviting other committee members or town employees, I think it would be helpful if we had sort of I don't want to say it's a checklist, because I don't want to go through and say check, check, check. But yeah, a template, yeah, sort of a guidelines maybe that we can ask of others, but also that we can kind of ask that as they're going through their regular work, that this helps to kind of focus that lens on diversity and inclusion. Yeah. And when we're talking about the town planning or the implementation committee making those choices, there are implications of any choices that we make, right? So I think it's important to have that lens on when we're making those decisions. That's what I'm thinking through. Does that make? Do you know what I mean? So I don't want it to be perceived, though, as we're like asking people to think about this as something that, like, we are imposing or auditing or requiring or anything like that. It's encouraging people to think about things and reminding and yes, all those things. Yeah.
Giving them a cheat sheet for the presentation, like.
Yeah, exactly.
I think-
Exactly. Yeah.
I think just that list of questions, things to be thinking about,
Yeah.
or considerations, I think that will be welcome by town staff.
Good.
Because I think a lot of staff are interested. It's just, what's the starting point? How do they, if they want to start making sure that services, programs are inclusive, and having questions or
helps
something to
align them.
frame
Yeah.
the thinking and then discussion
And the work.
will be very helpful and welcome.
Good. I'm happy to hear. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't anticipate it being not well received, but I just want to make sure that as we're presenting it, that we're thinking through that. Because we want to collaborate, really.
Yeah.
So that's the intent behind it, I think. So you had found this kind of you want
Just
talk
to
about that?
sort of get the conversation started. I don't have any particular affinity for these questions. I just thought it was a good starting place. I found them in one of the Advancing Equity and Inclusion, a Guide for Municipalities. It was just a document that I found and saw those, thought maybe they were a good way to kick off the conversation. I'm sure we want to tweak some of those. I'm sure other additional questions you might want to add. So it was just intended as a starting point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I also think that just given the nature of diversity, there is a breadth of community members that potentially need our support. And I know that we're few in number and that we perhaps have different affinities with different subsets of the community. And I don't think we should be apologetic or ashamed of championing for specific groups of people. And I've made it clear that there are some people that are at one end of the economic spectrum that I feel need support, and I'm prepared to champion for those people wherever I think I can. But perhaps we can individually identify with subgroups of our community that we can stand up for, or make sure that their voice, as best we understand it, is projected to the people that we talk to.
That would be wonderful.
Do we have the next guests for next? Do we have information?
We had put together a short list. So one thought that I have, if you all want some time to think about the questions, add, delete, modify, if you want to send those to me, I'm happy to compile, to expand on that starting point. If you would like to continue to have some discussion or review, I can certainly share those back out. But we did at our last meeting, we had identified some some other groups that we were interested in hearing from. I know we talked about the library. I have talked to our community development director. He is over building economic development, but the other piece of his role is he is the town's ADA coordinator, and so he can talk about ADA being Americans with Disabilities Act. So the work the town has done in recent years, the town did complete an extensive planning process, and then they have just recently, last year through town meeting, adopted a Commission on Disabilities. And that was actually one thing that occurred at town meeting this week. The town accepted a statute, and Mass General Law allows, if it's accepted by the town, parking fines collected for handicap parking violations can be used by this committee, and they have a plan for using those for some educational resources and materials. But anyway, Fred is happy to come in and speak to his role as the ADA coordinator, as well as that commission and the work that it's doing.
And I think isn't there a disability committee as well that's made up of residents in town that are kind of advised the?
That's
It's
the
the same.
commission.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Jim was referencing something with respect to Cara, that they were part of a subcommittee or something for diversity. I mean, I think it would be worth it to hear from her.
Oh, yeah, the CARA's representing.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, I'll clarify with him if he
Okay.
was referring to the time that she served on the master plan
Yeah.
committee. It was also the time she was on this committee, and I'll double
Yeah.
check on what he was referring to.
Okay.
But Kara is the Director of Youth and Family Services, so at some point you may want her to come and talk to you with that hat on about
Yeah.
the services that are
Or we could have a combo if there's something new.
delivered. And
Yeah,
then
that's true.
there were a couple of others, so I'm not sure if you have, based on what you heard today, is there something that seems logical to hear from next?
It was illuminating. Today was illuminating to me in terms of the master plan and the implementation and all the steps that are included in that. That was very helpful. So to me, the community development piece, which covers some of those kind of the logistics of getting those things in place, would be helpful for me.
And in addition to that, the library.
Oh, yes, the library.
I would love
Hot
to hear
topic
from
right
them.
now, yes.
I mean, I'm sure everybody
Yes.
would.
They're in mourning at the moment, so we'll give them a break.
They're in,
No. I'm sure there are next steps.
yes, they're in
So-
mourning and action.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's true. I'm just hoping that it is. One thing that struck me from the two presentations today, and just as a continuity of some of the work that was previous done by this committee, is around language access. And I'm happy to see that was, both Jim and Zach talked about language access in their presentations around, the surveys going on in multiple languages for both the businesses and residents. I think that's really important. So I would want to, just thinking to some of these questions, I would want to make sure that we add that, because we do have a specific need many needs in this community as far as language access. So I think that it would be important to add that to one of our questions that we want to include on the list.
We are seeing in some departments, there are staff who speak
Great.
other languages. I know the police department
Yeah.
has hired a number of folks, but it's good that we have that internal capacity, but that's different from having a broader
Yeah.
approach and talking about communications. We're continuing to work on developing communications planning, and I think all of that does get discussed, and a big piece of it is just understanding, what are the needs, what languages, and how are people accessing information. We've got social media, we've got, we can still mail things, what's the best, so it's always, there's a lot of discussion around, depending on the project or what we're trying to communicate, how best to communicate it, so.
Right, in multiple ways, not a one size
Exactly.
fits all, because it doesn't fit all, right?
Yeah.
So,
It sure does.
Which languages do we need to communicate in order to capture the attention of what proportion of the Westborough community? So, for example, I noticed when some languages were mentioned that Brazilian Portuguese was not on that list.
Yeah.
And we know that in central Massachusetts,
Right.
there's a very large Portuguese-speaking population. I don't think Hindi was on that list either.
No, and I think it has come up when we were at the beginning of COVID, when we were working on putting together a resource list for residents in the community who may have various needs. We had some discussion around languages that those resources, the list should be translated into. I believe we did Spanish, Portuguese, Mandarin. There were 5 languages.
No.
And then similar discussion, the senior needs assessment that we talked
And
about.
Australian wasn't on that list?
Australian wasn't on that list. The senior needs assessment, we had some discussion around for the, that particularly we're targeting seniors. So, yeah, I think there needs to be some better knowledge. Some of what we're getting out of our senior needs assessment is a demographic overview. And again, that's what we learn. We can learn some things from the census data. It certainly doesn't tell us everything, but it's a starting point.
And the schools probably have some data
Yep.
around that as well, because
We work
all
with
of
the
the school
schools.
communications are available in those 5
Multiple
different languages
yes.
as well. So, and I think that some of that is captured on pupil as students are signed up, they're captured what languages are spoken at home. So that might be something that we would have access to. I mean, obviously, it's only representing people, families who are involved with the schools, but that's a pretty large percentage of the town as well. So,
I think where we have opportunities to ask that question,
Yeah.
what languages would you prefer, or would you be comfortable,
Communication.
receiving communication? So I think we need to start, as we have opportunities to get that information, to start gathering it.
yeah.
Put it on the tax bill or something.
Yeah. That's what I did.
So when the town sends out notices of like a hearing or a warrant, and those are only in English, so is there a way we can also ask, like how schools send out notices in the bottom, there's a hyperlink where Portuguese or different, so can the town, is the town able to do that, like send out in different languages, and you can just click on it, because like when you subscribe to the emails, like to get,
Right. I think there are some rough ways that can be done using Google Translate, which is not always,
Yeah.
sometimes it's better than nothing, but in terms of our capacity to do that at some other level, we don't have that internally. We do, again, going back to the resource list, when we were at the beginning of COVID, we reached out and had a translator. We engaged someone to do that work. So I think we just need to identify what things, there may be some identification prioritization, and then what level, if it's a legal public hearing notice versus communication about an upcoming event. One might need to be a more formal translation. Another could be something, just thinking
Yeah.
through this out loud.
But that would be a huge benefit in terms of increasing the participation,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. The other thing we try to do sometimes is work with members of different communities to help. They may not ultimately translate it, but they can do some outreach to their community and at least spread the word. So.
Okay.
And it occurred to me too that if a language is sufficiently represented in this town, there's almost certainly someone or some people that are competent enough in both English and that language to make sure that any machine translation that we do actually makes sense and says what it's meant to say. And that's not a high level of sophistication you need in that language.
So that's an ongoing effort, but I'm happy to see that it was represented in both of the presentations today, and more. We'll keep that on the list, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Do we want to take more time to review these questions kind of offline and think through them, and then maybe have more of a discussion on it next
We can
time?
keep adding to them, yeah.
We can just keep
as we
adding
go,
to it.
yeah.
I like that, yeah.
And we'll push those suggestions back through Kim. Is that the...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fine. Happy to do that.
Anybody, any announcements? Anything happening?
Well, we just heard about those. We have the trick or treating, the downtown on the 25th, and then the 27th, it sounds like, is winter stroll. So those are two things to put on our calendars, I think. We had town meeting, which we've heard about some.
And I'd just like to wish our friends that are celebrating Diwali,
Oh,
happy
yes,
Diwali.
Diwali.
Enjoy the sweets.
Yes. And do we want to set I think we talked about the speakers for next time, and then we'll revisit the list of questions. Is there anything else for the agenda for the next meeting?
And the date would be 17th?
November 17th?
Yes.
Same time, 3:30, okay. Good. We've covered all our business for today.
I believe so. I guess we're adjourned.
We need a motion to
Yes,
adjourn?
that's what I was just going to say.
Well, I think you just made it. I'll second it.
All right.
So,
All in favor, or?
I am.
Yes.
all right.
That's
We're adjourned.
All right. Thank you.
Westborough TV should